We are at Schloss Leopoldskron, the home of the Salzburg Global Seminar. And if you look out across the lake from the Schloss, you can see a very tall mountain, the Untersberg. My guest, who is taking part in the annual American Studies program, which is this year about great American literature, is soon to be banished to the top of the Untersberg for a very long time, maybe the rest of his life. And I am going to allow him to have 3 books, 3 great works of American literature, to keep him company on his mountain retreat. Christopher Bigsby is Professor of American Studies at the University of East Anglia in England. You're also an author, a broadcaster, and head of the Arthur Miller Centre, and I believe you, in fact, brought Arthur Miller here to Salzburg.
I did. Not long after a play of his has opened in London called Broken Glass, which was about Kristallnacht. And I persuaded Miller to come here partly because his wife, Inga Morath, who was a photographer, her family came from Salzburg. So that was the leverage I used. And we persuaded the National Theatre to bring the cast of the upcoming Death of a Salesman over to the Schloss. They were in the first week of rehearsals, and they went into public rehearsals here. And we had actors, directors, writers from all around the world. There was a rather strange incident in relation to that. He'd earlier written a play called The Archbishop's Ceiling, which is set in Czechoslovakia. And the whole point of the play is, are there or are there not microphones concealed in the ceiling? Well, I did a public interview for Austrian television here in the Schloss, and people were invited in from the locality. And while they were coming in, Arthur and I went into the library and chatted. And because his play Broken Glass had just been on, the Holocaust was in his mind. And we were saying, I wonder if there are a bunch of old Nazis who are coming in. Later, Austrian television sent me a cassette of this, and there was our conversation at the beginning, because we'd both forgotten that we were wearing radio microphones. So just as in his play The Archbishop's Ceiling, there's an Archbishop's Palace with concealed microphones possibly in the ceiling. So here we are in what was once an Archbishop's Palace in Salzburg, bugging ourselves with these microphones, which we've forgotten all about.
Well, Christopher, you won't have any secret microphones on the top of the Untersberg, so you can say what you like. But you will also have 3 books. What is your first choice?
Well, the first choice is also peculiarly not irrelevant to the discussion about Arthur Miller. And it's a little lateral, this, so I'll have to explain it. I was in Salzburg many, many years ago for the seminar, and I went into town into a second-hand bookseller's, and I went down into the cellar where they had some English language books. And I found The Life of Nathaniel Hawthorne by Rose Lathrop Hawthorne. That was his daughter. But it had a signature on it, which was Sister Alfonsa, a Catholic nun. Only later did I discover that that was Hawthorne's daughter. Hawthorne, who wrote this novel, The Scarlet Letter, set back in Puritan times, his daughter actually became a Catholic nun. And I later gave that book to Arthur Miller, for a rather strange reason, I suppose, and that's because Nathaniel Hawthorne's forebear was Judge Haythorne, who presided over the Salem witchcraft trials, and of course Arthur wrote The Crucible. So I gave him the book. I've always regretted it because I wanted to keep it. The Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne was on my mind. Then I started, much to my surprise, writing a novel. I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, never told my wife why I was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I started writing. She began to get worried after a time. And I was writing about this woman, and I guess I was about page 40 or 50 before I realised it was Hester Prynne. Hester Prynne, the central character in The Scarlet Letter. And from that moment onwards, I was writing a prequel to The Scarlet Letter called Hester. And in the end, I later wrote a sequel to The Scarlet Letter called Pearl, because Pearl is the name of Hester's daughter. And in the prequel, I was trying to answer several of the questions which are raised in The Scarlet Letter, but we have no answers to. We begin that novel, almost begin it. There is a sort of preliminary bit, a Custom House sketch, but the story begins with Hester appearing in public and being condemned as an adulteress. She is married and has had a baby, Pearl. Nobody knows who the father was. Nobody knows the fate of her husband. And he eventually turns up and says, "Call me Chillingworth." Now I began to get interested. How do we know her name was Hester Prynne? If she's run away from her husband and is trying to conceal that fact, she wouldn't use his name. Would she use her maiden name? But that would be a bit of a giveaway. So we're already in a world in which we don't quite know who people are. And when Roger Chillingworth turns up, the husband, he conceals his identity. Now I'm beginning to get interested in the extent to which this is a novel about America. And America, people always went to transform themselves, to change themselves. And actually, historically thereafter, through the 19th century into the 20th, very often that involved a change of name. And there was something almost existential about America. You define yourself, you become a self-made man in almost a literal way. You think of an early series of novels by James Fenimore Cooper, in which the central character has constantly changing his name. He's Long Rifle, he's Hawkeye, he's Natty Bumppo. Depending on the circumstance in which he finds himself, he's constantly redefining. Now, there comes a moment when Hester goes off into the forest with the man who is the father of her child, who, unbeknown to everybody, and just to destroy the story, in case people watching this have never read it, is the minister. And she says, "We could run away." He says, "I couldn't do that." And she says, "Of course you could. You could change your name." Now, that really struck a bell with me, because there is this business of reinventing yourself when you go to America. If she says to him, "You could change your name," has she changed her name? Is Roger Chillingworth's name truly that? So in the prequel, which is this, Hester, available from all reasonable booksellers, I'm answering the question, why did she marry Roger Chillingworth and why did she leave him? And when did this affair happen that left her pregnant at the beginning of that novel? How did that come about? So this is a classic of American literature, and already the Americanness is apparent. If this had been an English novel, it would be about love and money. It would be about sense being balanced by sensibility and rewarded by marriage. And because marriage in those days was connected with money, those two elements would come together. This is a book about sex, written in New England, published in 1850, and then having this set back in the 17th century. And there's a quality there which you wouldn't find in the English novel. It's different in another way, in that there is something excessively male about 19th century American writing. Very often written by men, with men at the centre. Of course, there's a big exception to this, and that is the biggest seller was Uncle Tom's Children. But on the whole, it's a male world, partly because America was being settled. And those in the forefront of that, the Hawkeyes, the leather stockings, the long rifles, the James Fenimore Cooper figures, are themselves male. Hawthorne takes a woman, puts her back in the 17th century, and makes her the moral centre of the universe that he creates, because he's judging those who judge her. She has broken no law except their law, their moralistic laws. Her world is a natural world. She was in love, the child is the product of love, and she is condemned and has to wear the Scarlet Letter A, which in the minds of the Puritans, of course, is A for adultery. But is it A for America? Is it A for angel? What is it? We're in that world of the 19th century of symbolism, in a sense, rather than metaphor. That's to say, there's a field of meaning, there's a field of possibility, because that's what America was. It was a field of possibility. It hadn't yet coalesced. You couldn't yet define it. Everybody who was in it was a part of the process of defining and creating this thing. And at the heart of it is a woman, Hester Prynne.
Well, that's It's a wonderful story, and maybe on the top of the mountain you might write the next week or next exciting episode, first to print. What's your second book?
Well, it's another classic, I have to say, of American literature, and it's Moby Dick. I know I'm being very predictable here. I've always found that if we have a thing in England called pub quizzes, you know, people go in, have a pint, and then they have quizzes. And I could always make a great deal of money by asking people what the first line of Moby Dick is. And I can imagine people watching this, even now, are shouting out at me, "Call me Ishmael." But in fact, "Call me Ishmael" is not the first line of Moby Dick. And part of the interest to me is the fact that it isn't. First line of Moby Dick is, well, the first word is etymology. There is a whole section before we reach "Call me Ishmael." And what happens in etymology is, first of all, it's the etymological roots of whale are given, because here we are chasing the great white whale, Moby Dick, in the different languages. Then there's a section with sub-librarian who gives endless literary quotations about whales. And in the process of that, he gives you details about whales, the amount of blood they have and so on. All of this before we begin the novel. I think, why the hell's that there? Well, in a way, everything we read in those opening sections turns out to be irrelevant. How do you know something? Well, you adduce a series of facts about them. And when you've got that series of facts, do you know them? I mean, I could describe how tall you are, the colour of your hair, and so on. Would I, at the end of that, know who you are? I would have adduced a series of facts. I would have created this taxonomy. But, you know, no taxonomy without misrepresentation. It doesn't get you to the essence of this. At the heart of this novel is a hunt for a white whale, pursued by the sort of maniacal Captain Ahab. But as with a white screen in a cinema, it's just white until you project something on it. He projects on it a kind of symbol of evil, which he then pursues. There's a moment in the novel when a gold doubloon is nailed to the mast of the ship. It has a very strange design on it. And there's a cabin boy, and he watches people go up to this coin and look at it. And as they do, he declines the verb to see. I see, you see, he sees. Because each one of them sees something different in this strange design nailed to the mast. Everybody sees something different in the white whale. Now, part of the interest, again, in this novel, is here is a writer writing about the attempt to harpoon, to pin down meaning, the meaning of Moby Dick. Hence the irony of the etymology at the beginning, the information that really doesn't amount to anything. Once again, this is, a year after the Scarlet Letter, 1851. People are asking, who are we? What is an American? What does it consist of? What is this country? Still a large part of it unsettled. They're trying to pin it down. They're trying to harpoon the meaning. And this is a novel about the meaning of meaning, or the difficulty of ascertaining what the meaning is. The difficulty of ascertaining the meaning of America. That remains the problem today. Over 250 books have been written about the nature of American identity. Far, far more than books written about any other country. It was going to be partly because this is an immigrant country, so every immigrant who sets foot changes the world that they come into. It's not as though there is a fixed world, they join it. It's a fluid world. It is its fluidity that's its attraction. Every one of them is looking for something different when they land here. It's I see, you see, he sees. America is the white whale onto which people have always projected their hopes and imaginings. And really there is no stability to that. The moment America is fixed, it's a world of stasis. It will lose its attraction. It will lose its reason for being. Its reason for being, and it's quite amazing in the 21st century, this remains true, is that it's an immigrant society. it holds itself up to the world. It purports to welcome them. All right, there are restrictions from time to time, but it's amazing the number that do come in.